The crash of gunfire resounds over southern Pennsylvania. It's July 3rd, 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg has been raging for 3 days. The largest artillery barrage in the history of American warfare has just reached its climax. Pickett's charge has begun. This has always been seen as the moment when General Robert E. Lee, who had seemed invincible for so long, lost the battle. New evidence from the battlefield suggests a different story. Over 3 hot days in July 1863, the forces of the Union and the Confederacy fought an epic battle near a small town in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. 2 huge armies squared up to each other. For the Confederates, the battle-hardened Army of Northern Virginia, numbering 75,000 soldiers. On the Union side, a 90,000-strong Army of the Potomac. Today, millions of visitors come to see the ground where this battle reached its climax. This is where Pickett's charge finally fell apart. After 3 days of terrible fighting, the Union Army had triumphed.
And Meade rides up, and someone yells at him, "We've beaten them, sir. We've won. We've won."
Here, beneath this very clump of trees, is where the Confederates' courageous attack was broken on July 3rd, 1863. History says this is where the battle ended. But is this really where Lee lost?
Of all battles in which American troops have fought, Gettysburg is the most encrusted with both mythology and, I think, hyperbole.
And so many of those myths focus on day 3 of the battle. Tom Vossler was a colonel in the U.S. Army, a veteran of Vietnam and the Cold War. He's traveled every inch of this battlefield, investigated the historic accounts, and he's come up with a new approach to understanding the events.
Looking at the 3rd day's fighting, Pickett's charge, with military analysis, it is my view that that attack was totally unnecessary. In fact, squandered some damn fine infantry.
Vossler is not alone in believing day 1 was crucial.
The first day of the battle has really been overlooked, I think. What happened is critically important in setting up what's going to happen the next 2 days.
To reach his conclusions about day 1, Vossler has employed a method he used in the U.S. Army. It's called RTEP, Army Training and Evaluation Program. RTEP objectively examines how effectively a commander applies a series of so-called principles of war.
Principles of war were studied by these officers in the 1800s. They existed then, and of course we used them in the 1900s. They're still being used today.
Day 1 was a contest for control. Which commander-in-chief could take the early initiative?
There's a great contrast between the Army commanders at Gettysburg. On the Confederate side, you have Robert E. Lee, who is at the absolute peak of his powers. Extremely confident and leading an army that believes in him absolutely, believes that whatever he asks them to do, they will do. On the United States side, you have George Gordon Meade, who's only been in command of the Army for 3 days at the time the battle breaks out.
He's about 48 years old. He has been in the Army since the beginning of the war. He is a professional soldier, having been trained at West Point.
As the Confederate Army approached Gettysburg, news of nearly all its movements was being passed on to General Meade. And this was being communicated by a brand new technology, the telegraph.
The telegraph essentially is a system where an electrical pulse is sent through wires, and this pulse travels at the speed of light. Now, this is essentially instantaneous communication. And what this would do on the battlefield is really revolutionary.
Charles Ross has studied the role of technology in the Civil War. He believes the easy availability of intelligence to Meade was vital.
What was really novel about this was that it allowed a commanding officer on the battlefield to get information in real time without relying on visual cues, without relying on sound, or without relying on couriers. Meade had a strategic web of telegraph lines that wove all through Maryland and Pennsylvania and allowed him to really keep tabs on where all the parts of Lee's army were before the battle began.
So even before the battle had begun, Lee was at a disadvantage. His intelligence was failing him. Unaware of Meade's location, he had not massed his forces effectively. Union cavalry commander John Buford knew he couldn't win this fight, but he had made an observation that would prove vital.
Buford understands the terrain very, very well. Buford, as he rode into the Gettysburg area, could see the high ground south of the town that will be the key terrain during the battle.
Buford realized that his army would have time to seize that high ground if he could delay the Confederate advance, and he believed his men had the weapons to do the job. But Buford's tactics were crucial as well.
He will dismount his cavalrymen from their horses, giving the impression that these are Union infantry here, not cavalry, and giving an impression of greater strength here than actually was.
So Buford had bought his army precious time.
He knew that his cavalry could not hold for long against a division of Confederate infantry, and so he used his troopers in the most effective manner possible to force the Confederates to take the time to shake out into battle lines, bring their artillery up, and do all of the things that eat up 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and give United States infantry time to march closer and closer to the relief of the cavalry.
Buford had very effectively applied one of the key principles of war, economy of force. In contrast, General Lee's failure to mass enough troops for his attack had denied him a swift victory in this first fight. The Confederates were inching forward, but paying a bloody price, one that would come back to haunt them on day 3. Now, as Union infantry arrived, the battle grew. One of the first infantry clashes was here, in little-known Herbst Woods. Battlefield historian Scott Hartwig has discovered regimental accounts that reveal just how costly the fight was here.
Well, this fight is, in a sense, a microcosm of what the whole first day's battle is about. For the Union forces, it's about delaying and buying time. And to do that, you're sacrificing your soldiers. And now comes this clash that for many of these soldiers is almost indescribable. One of the Confederates in the clash said the firing was so heavy, it was like all these thunderstorms all wrapped into one. He also said there was so much smoke with the humidity of that day, it almost became like night within the woods. So imagine soldiers yelling and screaming, cursing, screams of wounded, screams of the dying, all these weapons exploding, dark smoke enwrapping all these men, and you start to get a picture of the nature of the battle.
In the middle of this battleground lies Willoughby Run Creek. As the Confederate 26th North Carolina Regiment advanced to its edge, they were hit by a murderous round of fire.
From that side of the creek to this side of the creek, and we can see it's almost a hop, skip, and a jump to get across this creek. They're going to lose 4 color bearers. One man's going to be shot before he gets to the creek. 2 men are shot in the creek, and another man is shot on the other side of the creek. And they're simply passing this battle flag on to the next man.
The 26th North Carolina lost 550 men, more than 60% of their total strength. But just 48 hours later, this battered regiment would be lining up for Pickett's charge.